Farmer Joe was distraught over the disappearance of one of his cows. It had never happened before, and the circumstances were suspicious, to say the least. But Joe had a farm to run, and he didn't have time to try to get to the bottom of it. 8 months later, he would find his cow out of the blue, and would wish he hadn't. Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. It was a regular day at Joe's farm, and he was going about his routine when the phone rang. When he picked up, it was his buddy Harry, and he was calling to say that he had seen a cow standing near the forest swamp. Joe had lost a cow 8 months ago, so he asked Harry what the cow looked like. But his friend seemed to be afraid of something, and he didn't want to continue talking, so he hung up. Well, Harry had already said he saw the cow by the swamp, so Joe decided to head out. The forest was huge, and Joe had underestimated how difficult it would be to search for his cow. Hours had passed and the sun was setting, so Joe had to make a choice. Either he would continue searching in the darkness, or he would return the next day. He decided to return the next day and be better prepared. The next morning, after caring for his animals at the farm, Joe went into the woods and started searching again. First, he tried calling Harry, but his friend didn't pick up. He had no idea where to look for his cow, but luck was on his side this time. Shortly after entering the woods, Joe saw something in the distance. There was a piece of land lined with ribbons, and it seemed like animal services were there. Before he could get closer to see if his cow was around, an animal services employee asked him to keep his distance. But when Joe looked over the shoulder of the employee, he saw his cow. He would recognize her head anywhere. Joe had to find a way to get closer and see what was happening. When he asked the employee, he said something important was going on, but he didn't give any details, and he asked Joe to leave. Fortunately, the woods were quite large, and the animal services employees were staying on one side of the tape. Joe was able to find another route and get his cow. He didn't know if it was legal or not, but he was more than willing to take the risk. As Joe made a detour to get his cow, his thoughts turned to Harry. How did Harry know this was happening? Why was he so anxious on the phone? Why didn't he say that animal services were involved? Harry was his friend, after all, so there was something else going on here. Finally, Joe's detour was worth the effort, because he reached a point in the woods where he could see his cow from a distance. He was at a different angle, so he thought he could approach the cow without being noticed by animal services. However, things were about to take a turn. As Joe got closer and closer, he realized that his cow was acting out of character. When Joe saw his cow after 8 months, he gasped. She didn't look like herself anymore, and she was in terrible condition. Joe was a very experienced farmer, so he had seen a lot of things through the years, but nothing like this. It was clear that the cow had been through something traumatic. There was no time to waste. Joe had to get her to safety as soon as possible. But something was wrong. The cow behaved in a very unnatural way. She looked frightened, as if she no longer recognized Joe. As he was thinking all this, one of the animal services employees spotted him and yelled at the others to stop him. Fortunately, the animal control officers were unable to arrest him. Technically, he wasn't breaking any laws. He didn't have to do what they said because it was his cow. Plus, they were in the woods, so he wasn't trespassing on anyone's land. However, he didn't want to risk it, so he decided to cooperate. Maybe that was the best way to get his cow back. He had to work with these guys instead of against them. So he started with a sincere apology for sneaking in to reach his cow. The animal services employees told Joe that they had been instructed not to let anyone near the cow until further notice. Now that they knew Joe was the cow's owner, they realized maybe he could help them. But before we continue, don't forget to give this video a like to help it reach 10K and subscribe to the channel for more videos. As it turns out, they had found the cow only a couple of days earlier. A hiker had seen the animal, and he called them as soon as he noticed the condition the cow was in. They had no way of knowing how long it had been there already, but they figured it must have been a while. Joe still had no idea why his cow had been there for so long and almost begged the animal service workers to tell him. They looked at each other for a brief moment, as if they were hesitant to share what they knew. But in the end, they decided to help him. It was clear that Joe cared about his cow, and he just wanted answers after 8 months in the dark. According to the animal services employees, the cow was in the woods of its own free will. It wasn't alone in the forest, and it didn't want to leave. It seems that the cow had found something, and it didn't want anyone to come near it. Joe was very confused by this, and he needed to know what his cow had been protecting all this time. However, the animal services employees wouldn't tell him anything more. The information had to be kept out of the public eye. But that was his cow, and Joe had a way to prove it. The animal was tagged and numbered, and he had the necessary documentation to show that it was his cow. It would only be a matter of time to present the information to the court, and he was sure they would rule in his favor. This meant that the animal services employees were denying him access to his property, which is against the law. Joe started to explain all of this to him, and then they realized that there was nothing they could do. He was finally allowed to approach the cow. And once again, Joe noted the cow's strange behavior. He could see in her face a mix of fear and anger. It was clear that the cow didn't recognize him immediately. To be fair, it had been 8 months since they saw each other, so that made sense. But Joe didn't imagine what the cow would do next. From one moment to the next, the cow charged at Joe, and she stumbled back a couple steps. Then the animal's behavior seemed to change, and it looked like she was calming down. It seemed like the cow finally recognized Joe. So he tried again and got closer to her. This time, the cow greeted him. The entire time, the animal services employees were watching from a distance, and they couldn't believe that the cow was letting Joe get close. When Joe was finally close enough to see what the cow had been protecting this entire time, everything made sense. Under the cow, there was a small wolf cub drinking milk from her. Joe knew that wolves were a protected species in the area, so it was rare to see them around farms where they would be at risk. Most farmers, himself included, didn't want wolves around because they tended to kill the livestock. Now, before the cow went missing, she had lost one of her calves. It's possible that the cow saw the wolf cub, and it registered as a substitute for the calf she lost. Now that the wolf was old enough, it made sense that animal services wanted to take action. But the cow didn't want to be separated from the cub. That's why it was so aggressive to everyone but Joe. Eventually, they managed to get the wolf cub without angering the cow, with Joe's help. The wolf was taken to a protected environmental habitat to be monitored before it was released back into the wild. Once it was back in its natural habitat, it wouldn't be a target for angry farmers trying to protect their livelihoods. As for Joe, he was able to bring his cow back home and take care of her until she was healthy again. It was a happy ending for everyone involved. Let us know what you think of this story in the comments down below. Don't forget to like the video, share it, and make sure to subscribe for more. Until next time.